Thanks for joining us for this episode, and it's hard to believe at the time that we release this episode, we're going to be less than a week away from Easter 2023. Now, I'm sure your church has really gone all out to reach your community and let them know about Easter at your church, but maybe you're looking for some last-minute resources. Well, I want to tell you about something we've got available actually from my team at mustincrease.com and Church Media HQ. If you are looking for free Easter graphics and videos, we've got those for you. All you got to do is go to churchmediahq.com/advance. That's churchmediahq.com/advance, and you can download free graphics and videos that you can use at your church this Easter. I'm really looking forward to how your church uses this free content. So take advantage of it by going to churchmediahq.com/advance and downloading this free Easter content. Well, this episode actually features a conversation that Bryan had with some church leaders and pastors in the monthly Church Advance Hour of Encouragement. This is something that Bryan has started doing as of this year. And if you want to be a part of the next one, it's a completely free opportunity for you to connect with Bryan and other church leaders. So if you want to get connected with the next Church Advance Hour of Encouragement, then make sure you go to bryansams.com and get signed up for the next one. Again, it's a completely free event, and we'd love to have you be a part of the next one. But for now, we want to share with you part of the conversation from a recent Church Advance Hour of Encouragement. And so let's get started as we continue to advance a reformation, a fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches. This is Church Advance with Bryan Sams.
Again, welcome to this grab bag episode of Church Advance. And so I've got several questions here that we're going to work through. If you got a question that you want that something chimes in, probably the easiest thing just for everybody, because you know how funny Zoom can be, is to fire those questions off through a text message. Probably all you guys have my text, my number, or if you want to throw it up in the chat here, that's fine as well. I mean, obviously, I don't mind interaction at all, but it just gets funky sometimes, as you well know. So, anyways, we're gonna kind of focus on the topic of leadership in the church, related to actual functionality of leadership, deacons and pastors, and then off of that, I've got a few that I'm going to kind of lead into in regards to, leading yourself and managing all the different expectations that we sometimes have pulled at us. So let me just start with this question. What is the scriptural role of a deacon? Are there needs? Is there a need for elders? And so let's just kind of unpack that a little bit. And, obviously we go to scripture to determine what the roles of church leadership are. And I think, a couple things are really clear to me. One is that scripturally, there are two offices in scripture. I might be a little bit progressive to some, but I'm absolutely a Baptist. And I'm not afraid of that. I'm not ashamed of that. It's in our church sign. It's more than in our church sign. It's in the DNA of who we are. So we do hold a traditional position on church offices, which really is a biblical position on church offices. And we know this for a couple of reasons. Obviously, 1 Timothy 3 gives us the two qualification markers for the two different kinds of offices. And then you see this also in play in a couple of the epistles, like Philippians chapter 1, verse 1, where he says to the church of Philippi, with the bishops and deacons. So we know there's two. Okay, we also know this. We also know that within the groups of pastor and deacon, there are more than one in every case. We call this plurality sometimes. We call it multiplied shared leadership. That's what I call it here, not because I really feel like I have to go away from the word plurality. It just, most people understand shared leadership maybe more than they understand the technical word plurality of elders. What I mean by that is it, I've heard people talk like, okay, well, Acts 20, when it was the Ephesian elders, there could have been more than one church. I've also heard people bring up Hebrews chapter 13, where it says, obey them that have the rule over you. And some people will push back and say, well, that was a general epistle written to multiple congregations. So it doesn't necessarily imply that there was, more than one pastor. But definitively, Philippians 1 is definitive, meaning within one local congregation, there were multiple pastors, at least 2, and multiple deacons, at least 2. Okay, so we know that there are 2 offices, and then within those offices, scripturally, there are usually more than one. Now, maybe there's something to do with size, maybe in a brand new church, like we've just started a church 2-3 weeks ago, and the pastor of that church is sitting here in this room with me. Well, he's got 30 people in attendance, and really probably not in a position to add deacons. His deacons, at least this time, are the deacons of our church. But in time, as he develops leadership and so on and so forth, he will be seeking to put into play pastors and deacons. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say about leadership in the church is it's critical that you identify the actual biblical roles of these particular offices. And the way I teach it to our new members very simply is this: pastors are shepherds, deacons are servants. And that's how they function. So, and guys, let me tell you this, in the independent Baptist world, at least, and the Southern Baptist world that I'm more a part of now, this is not the way this shakes down. Okay. A lot of times you usually have one pastor singular who serves and functions like, kind of like the head of operations, a CEO, certainly a shepherd. I'm not trying to take away from that, but leads kind of the whole entire congregation singularly. And then he usually has a board of deacons that sometimes they function appropriately, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they function like as a governing advisory board over a pastor. And then you have staff. And most churches that I've been in, staff do not function like pastors. So now you can have a staff member and they can be a pastor. Like in our case, when Stephen comes to join our staff, Stephen Ashmore comes to join our staff, he is not just a staff member, he's a pastor. And so, yes, he's going to be employed by the church, but he is also going to be functioning like a shepherd, a pastor. And I think there's a difference. And I think that's where one of the way we've kind of got ourselves in trouble here a little bit is we've treated the pastor as one, and then everybody else that works around him kind of works for him in more of a servant capacity. This is when you'll hear the old jokes. All you guys that went to Bible college, right? You get out of Bible college, and what do they tell you? Man, go grab a broom, go grab the bottom rung. And it's true. You should be willing, right, to do any of those things. Everybody should be willing to do those things. But if all I am is a janitor, and all I am is a bus driver, and all I am is a kid corraller, I can probably make more money outside of the church doing the same thing. And if I'm not doing real ministry work, then I may not be considered really a pastor. Does that make sense? So I think that's how I view that. Now, one other thing about pastors. Scripturally, pastors, bishops, and deacons are the same thing. They just accentuate a different role. And you see the word used interchangeably in Acts 20, 1 Peter 5, among other places, where the role is what's being described. So when you think about the role of a pastor, you're thinking about 3 specific things. You're thinking about somebody who teaches the Bible. That's a shepherd. You're thinking of somebody who's an example to the flock. And then you're thinking about somebody who leads people spiritually. Okay, that's our essential job description. So in my church, we have multiple pastors, but only one of them, at least until June 1st, only one of them is paid, and that's me. The other 3 pastors at our church function as what we would call lay pastors. Some people would call them lay elders. The reason I don't distinguish between pastors and elders is I don't think there's a distinguishment in the scriptures. So if you've got a group of pastors, when you got a group of pastors, they are a group of elders. So when you see a church that has a distinction between pastors and elders, I think that's a mistake. Now, you may disagree. with me on that, and that's totally fine. But as far as I see it biblically, I don't see a distinction there. So if you want to say, are we elder led? Well, yes. But we're pastor led and we're bishop led all at the same time. So that's kind of how we dice it. And I think it's diced that way scripturally. So when I say that we are pastor led, what I mean is that churches are shepherd led. Churches should be led by shepherds, just like sheep are led by shepherds. It's the analogy in scripture. It's the analogy of God and us in scripture. And so what does that mean? Well, it means three things. It means, number one, I am teaching the flock. Number two, I'm an example to the flock. And number three, I spiritually lead the flock. And by the way, I really think the emphasis on bishopry in the New Testament is on spiritual leadership, not so much organizational leadership. I will tell you this right now. The person that organizes my church and runs my church, like organizationally, is a woman. Okay. She's not a pastor. She's not an elder. She's not a bishop, but she does help us organize and manage the affairs of the church. Now, I might be responsible to make sure those things are taking place, but that's not my essential function. Okay. Now, I wanted to give that to you guys because you could have somebody who leads people spiritually, teaches the Bible, and is an example to the believers who you don't have to pay to do that. And as it relates to building a team around you, you might just want to start looking around you like who's sitting on the front row, who's always volunteering, who's always there, and who's always visiting people and counseling people and praying with people and concerned about the spiritual needs of people. And what you may have around you is your next leader. Okay, your next leader that you can then turn around and develop and build up. Now, as it relates to deacons, deacons are servants. That's all that deacons are. They're not a board. They're not a governing body. They're servants, meaning their essential function is to do what needs to be done so pastors can stay doing the things that I just said pastors are supposed to do. Whether it's finances, buildings and grounds, widow care, visiting the sick, taking care of problems, benevolence issues, whatever those issues are. We broke ours into 4 categories: finances, buildings and grounds, benevolence, and widow care. That's the 4 categories that we have. And as our church grows and those needs continue to grow, we will have more than one deacon in each of those areas. We currently have 4 deacons. And I don't know if there's a magic number. I don't suppose that there is. But I would say that if you're bringing new deacons on or you're training deacons, they need to understand, they need to be taught, this is what your role, this is what your responsibility is. And our deacons and our pastors make what we call our leadership team. It's a shared leadership team. Everybody has insight into what we call the practical nature and needs of ministry. Outside of that, deacons don't wield any kind of decision-making power. I will give them entrance into helping me see things related to church business. And let me give you an example. Our church has grown extraordinarily in the last 8 months, really. Sorry about that. And we added 40 members in the fall. We've already added about 10 this spring. We're on our way to adding about 30 more probably before the spring is over. So when you start, that starts doubling over here. And our congregation's only a couple hundred people. So that's a lot. You know what I mean? It's not like a church of 5,000, growing by 60 or 80 members in a year is very aggressive for our size of church. So I realized that I needed an assistant, and my deacons had already told me they were concerned about me putting all my money and resources in church planning. They weren't concerned about that. They were concerned about the fact that my assistant pastor, Aaron, was going to be a church planner and that we were bringing in a Spanish church planner, but I wasn't bringing in anybody to help me as an assistant. Now, I've had an assistant for 6 years. So I told them that I would watch and monitor the church finances and things like that and, get back with them. So after February, the numbers came in. I started realizing, well, actually at the end of January, then into February, I realized that financially the resources were going to be in play. So I called the leadership together and all I did was give them the numbers, show them what was going on. And then I said, I think it's probably time for us to move toward a hire. I'd like your opinion on it. Now, ultimately, I had to make the decision of bringing someone in. I ultimately made the decision of who I was going to bring in. But I did get the input from people who are concerning themselves with things like finances, budgets, and all those kinds of things, because it does matter. I don't want to be the guy out here making reckless decisions. So I had unanimous consent among all deacons and all pastors that it was time to pursue an associate pastor. And then, of course, the decision of the who and the what and what role they were going to serve in and all that was ultimately my decision to make. So hopefully that gives you a little perspective on pastors and deacons. Anybody got a question there, anything you want to throw out related to that? I mean, that's a quick crash course. Most of you are probably already there. You probably already see it that way. I can see a challenge maybe if you don't function like that, maybe trying to flip the script. But yeah, Michael, go ahead.
I've got some folks in our church who kind of hold to a more traditional view for pastors as being heavily involved in visiting the sick, hospital visits and such like that. And I know you mentioned to me that that's kind of something you've backed off on. So I know there was a guy that told me that he thinks shepherding includes that kind of thing. So how do you balance out that aspect, or do you delegate it, or what is the balance that you find?
Yeah, Mike, that's a great question, man. That's
people take it personally.
They do take it personal. And I'm sure, guys, that I've been considered not a great pastor by some. Okay. This is all about expectations, Michael. This is all about expectations. Our expectations must come from Scripture. It must come from the Lord. It must come from, I think, our unique circumstances. What I know scripturally is the three things that I told you do not change. That the teaching, the example, those things do not change. The other things could change, though, in some ways. Like, example, you might be in a rural church or a very small church, and you may not have leadership developed and built up yet. So you may be involved in a little bit more right now than you would ever want to be or care to be. Now, here's the catch. It's not that people don't get visited in our church. It's that I am not the one that does it all.
Sure.
So I have to see to it that it gets done. And that's by training leaders around me. Now, quite honestly, to answer your immediate question, there's nothing that can be done about the person that has expectations on the pastor that are not biblical, if you will. And what I would say is this, that the way I curbed that in the early days was I taught it. I taught it. In fact, the Sunday night, we used to have Sunday night here. The Sunday night that I was called to come here, I preached a sermon. No, I'm sorry. This was the Sunday I got voted on. So I preached Sunday morning. I don't even know if you knew this, Chan. So on Sunday morning, I preached a gospel message. People were saved. Then they were going to vote on me that afternoon. So I preached the afternoon service that was that was leading to the vote. And so my title, my sermon that Sunday night, July 24th, 2016, was What You Should Expect in a Pastor. And I basically laid that exact thing out to the church. And I told them, I'm a young pastor with a young family. I'm not a 72-year-old grandpa with no kids in the house. My life's going to look different. And I can't be consumed with things that are not a part of my job description. So, and I told them, I hadn't even been voted on yet. So if you're looking for a 60-year-old pastor who's going to be at the hospital every time somebody's got a broken toenail, and if you expect that every birthday party I'm going to be at, and every time somebody's sick, I have to go visit them in their home, or every time somebody misses church, I said, I'm not your guy. I'm not that guy. I do not believe that's what I'm called to do. So the church was very gracious. Now, it doesn't mean, Michael, it doesn't mean that there weren't people who didn't get it and people didn't like it. In fact, I think Aaron told me one time that there was a frustrated member. Of course, Aaron's always been very good with frustrated members here. He's he's laughing at me. Yeah, I think he's done a good job. He said not always. I think he's done a great job. I would say Aaron's always done a good job basically defending me, if you will, as an assistant. And one time I think somebody was leaving the church. They didn't tell me, of course, they did tell Aaron. I guess they felt the liberty to tell Aaron. And they said, I think they even said to Aaron, we think you're more of a pastor than Pastor Sam's is. And Aaron had a really great answer to that. But in their mind, it may have been true. Okay. In their mind, they may have felt like Aaron had more empathy, like Aaron may have been there a little bit. Maybe. I think in this particular case, it was because Aaron interacted with them more than I did. And on a few accounts, Aaron was able to go to certain events that I just couldn't go to. And sometimes it was because I had to deputize him. Hey, man, I can't do this. I need you to be there or whatever. Either way, it doesn't really matter. They're not going to change my job description as the pastor, and I'm not going to change their mind. And I have to be okay to exist with people like that. And I also have to be willing to let people walk away if in the case that they just don't feel like that's an appropriate thing. So all I can do is teach the Bible, try to fulfill my role as best I can. Beyond that, I have to just kind of let the chips fall where they may. By the way, this is a total side note, guys, but I was so blessed by this. In fact, David Garlick series, pastor here in McClenny, we were just talking about this, not this, but some other things and yesterday at lunch. And I said, I reminded him of the story of Shimei and David, where Shimei is throwing rocks at David and kicking up dust and going crazy, and David's armor guy's like, hey, you want me to go take this guy's head off? And David says, no, man, look, let him curse. It might be that the Lord sent him to curse me so that the Lord basically can turn around and bless me in spite of his cursing. Now think about that, guys. That is a perspective of dealing with critics and dealing with naysayers that is not as easy to live out as it is to agree with. But I will tell you, man, what a perspective to say, people can criticize me if they want to. Maybe God is letting them criticize me so that I can, so that God will come to my defense in a greater way and bless me in a greater way, just because I'm in that sense being persecuted. So I've just learned, Michael, that, man, people can say whatever they want to say and they can believe whatever they want to believe, but I've got to be resolute in what's best for my church, what's best for my family, and what's best for the future as I'm building this organization. I hate to say it like that, but I think you know what I mean. As I'm building what this is going to look like, I can't get in the trap of letting people write my job description for me. If I do that, I'm gonna get in trouble. We'll get in trouble fast. So yeah, man, that's how I would deal with that one.
Well, we're going to pick up the rest of this discussion in the next episode. And until then, we do hope that you will subscribe to our YouTube channel, that you'll follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you may listen to podcasts. And if you really enjoy the content, then please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review and share this podcast with your fellow pastors and church leaders. This podcast is hosted by Bryan Sams. It's produced by myself, Luke Clayton, and my team at mustincrease.com. Well, we really are so glad that you are a part of our audience, and thank you for joining us. And we're looking forward to seeing you in the next episode as we continue to advance a reformation of fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches right here on Church Advance with Bryan Sams.